It's recording.
Is the red good? Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Cool. So everyone gets to hear that at the very beginning of the talk. Let's see. So if you're looking to learn a little bit more about Gitbook or to have a discussion on how that impacts our community, you're in the right place. My name is Josh Miller, both in real life and on Drupal.org and on Twitter and anywhere else I could possibly take it, much to the consternation of most Josh Millers in the world, because there's a lot of us. I am a developer, a designer, a writer, whatever I can be at Acromedia. I recently switched from Commerce Guys to Acromedia. Acromedia is now the premier partner who does all of the Commerce Guys work here in North America. So if you need e-commerce work, we're the people to talk to. Does anybody here not know what Gitbook is? Got one guy. Anybody else? A couple? Okay. Gitbook is kind of hard to see on this screen, but it's basically a static generated HTML website. That's all it is. And what it's doing is it's taking a repo of Markdown and generating HTML. And one of the biggest, most important features of Gitbook is a little feature you can install. You can't even see it on the screenshot, but it's this arrow here. Right here, actually, I'm sorry. It's this arrow here that takes you from being a casual observer, a greeter of documentation, and lets you go directly to the repo and change the content. You, as an anonymous user, can edit documentation whenever you see Gitbook with a particular thing installed. That's basically why we're having this conversation, because I believe that is the feature that's driving this just crazy far. Quick side note here, static site generators. We've probably all kind of seen them, heard them, interacted with them. There's a lot of really popular blog generators out there, and the idea is you basically keep a repo of your content, and then you run some sort of command line interface, and it generates your website, and then you put that build up on your website. They're really performant because you're not generating. Basically, you're putting your cache live, and that's it. There are a lot of them. I didn't realize how many there were until I found this website. It's out there. There's code that you can even look to see how this is generated. These are the top 4 according to the statistics they have here. I've heard of Jekyll. I didn't know it was a static site generator. I probably should have. Gitbook is right behind it, and it's pretty new comparatively to Jacko. The other two I've never heard of before either. But so I was like, okay, yeah, so there's like 8 of these, and I'm starting to scroll. There's like hundreds of these, and they're all like really specific, like static website generator, Node.js, static blog generator, simple one. Everyone's talking about being simple. There's a couple e-commerce ones in here. I don't know how they do that. Because you have to have sessions, you have to have carts. How do you do e-commerce? So it's just exploding right now online, static site generators. So why? What are they trying to do that, let's say, for example, Drupal can't do? What are they trying to do? I think, and this is me trying to get inside the head of somebody who wants this, because I secretly want this so much, I can't even tell you. They're trying to get away from the database, they're trying to get away from the installs, they're trying to get away from the constant patches, because when you generate content, when you render content, all you're really doing is you're getting everything out of the way and just putting exactly what that person's going to see up there online. You don't have to worry about sessions, you don't have to worry about a security patch, because the security is only going to happen when you're generating it. It's not going to happen when we're trying to access it. So it's just there's a lot of security issues that you can avoid just by taking out the middleman, as it were, the content management system. I'm telling you, it's just a huge number of these that are out there. Gitbook is really high because they have a very slick, I'll just go ahead since we're here, they have a very slick website. If you go to gitbook.com, they sell themselves really well. And what's fantastic about Gitbook and most of these things is their command line interfaces that you can install locally. Gitbook has done kind of what WordPress did originally to make themselves really well funded. Is yes, they've given their tool away for free. You can run Gitbook on any command line interface you want. But they're just making this super easy. You just hook it up to a GitHub account, the screen goes blue, and it will bring in that content, render it, give you a .mobi, I don't know what that is, a .epub, a PDF, all of these formats of your documentation from a repo that's completely managed, completely revisionable.
Mobi is the Kindle.
Okay, there you go. So you can have your documentation on Kindle, which is actually rather useful. I downloaded Matt Glamon's book that he just published from Pack Publishing. It's basically Drupal 8 in a nutshell kind of thing. I forget what it's actually called. I should probably know that. And I put the PDF on my Kindle as I was reading it on the way over here, and that was quite useful. So anyway, it kind of works with the same tools. Oh, there you go. Andy is going to show you all of that book. It's great on a Kindle because you don't have to carry it around. Okay, I'm going to go back to the slides now. So that's what a static site generator is. Any questions on those? Probably not. Because the real interesting thing that I wanted to talk about, this is basically like a formalized BOF, okay? Because I just really want you guys to interact with me, and we'll get there in a second. Gitbook has, like I said, it's exploded, and I feel like, I've been in the Drupal community now since 2007. Drupal 5 was going away, Drupal 6 was coming on board. And I feel like I've not seen documentation do this before. One, everyone's hosting their own documentation, it's not going to Drupal.org. That's interesting. I want to know your guys' opinion on that. Two, it's getting written by the developers in a very robust way. That's cool. Three, lots of projects are already doing this and have done it for a little while. The first one that I ever heard of doing this is the rules documentation. In fact, I was at a sprint for Drupal Commerce. Bojan Zivanovic, who's one of the maintainers of Drupal Commerce 2, was sitting next to me. I asked him, what can I do for documentation with Commerce? And he said, take the repo that Rules has and make it for Drupal Commerce. And I'm like, repo for documentation? What are you talking about? And it just like kind of blew my mind. And I was looking at this, and so we did that, and we created docs.drupalcommerce.com. You guys can go there, and you'll see on the sidebar, you can go to version 1, version 2 of Drupal Commerce. Documentation's all there. One is more just a link to some documentation that exists elsewhere. 2 is completely in a repo. Just did a couple searches this morning to find a few more. Drupal Console I knew was Gitbook. CiviCRM is about to port all of their documentation to Gitbook. I was just talking to Peter from Four Kitchens. He's back in the back there, and he's got something that he should tell you in between classes. It's going to talk about Aquifer, and it's kind of mind-blowing. It lets you do the build deploy method on Pantheon that you get with Platform, when you build a project.make and then you deploy it. You can do that with Pantheon, you can do that with Aqua, you can do that with any host using Aquifer, which is a really interesting tool. All their documentation, Gitbook. I just clicked on documentation, there it was, all Gitbook. I think basically if you're building a project right now and you just kind of want documentation to get out of your life, everyone's choosing Gitbook. So a little bit more about what Gitbook looks like if you're unfamiliar, because it's not necessarily going to knock you over what this thing looks like. If you go to docs.drupalcommerce.org, the typical Gitbook is responsive. It has a sidebar, it has content, and that's basically it. It tries to get out of your way and lets you read. The biggest feature, though, as I was talking about, is this edit this page button here. Now I'm going to click this. This is part of the demo that I talked about in the presentation too. I have direct commit access to the Commerce docs, so it just takes me straight into the repo. I'm not necessarily logged into this website, right? I'm logged into GitHub, which lets me edit this repo page based on that link. But let's say we're going to be somewhere else. Let's go into, I didn't see it on Aquifer's site. Let's go into, what was one of the other sites? Let's go and look at Drupal Rules, for instance. So Drupal Rules Gitbook, and it is like 3-4 links down. Click read. Okay, so I don't have access to Fago's documentation. This is what it looks like. It's just, I don't know, as a reader, as somebody who consumes lots of documentation, because I don't know everything, I feel like this is a really easy read. I feel like the spacing, all the default styles feel really good. You click edit this page, and what it does is it kicks you off straight into this page on GitHub. And then you can go and actually click edit using this button right here. And what that'll do is, and it'll tell you what it's about to do. You're editing a file in a project you don't have write access to. You're going to create a fork of this project. And then when you click save, it'll give you a link that'll let you pull that in as a pull, or push that as a pull request. And Fago, in his own leisure, can go in and say, oh, that's a great change to this documentation. Change, accept it, modify whatever he wants, and then push up the repo changes himself. So that's the killer feature of Gitbook.
So I don't know if you're using Gitbook, but Pantheon works pretty much the same way. Their documentation is repositories on GitHub.
So it's a static site generator.
And basically they've outsourced their documentation to their customers. It's brilliant.
It is. It is straight up brilliant. In fact, rewind about 4 years ago, and I was brought on at Commerce Guys to help Ryan produce the documentation for Drupal Commerce. One of the more arguably difficult things to do in Drupal is to sell e-commerce, and one of the reasons that is because documentation is hard to come by. And I wanted this. In fact, if you go back in the history of the documentation, I created a repo that was static markdown of the thing, and then I hand rendered it and put it into Drupal. Because that's, Ryan wanted it in Drupal, that's where it's going to go. I'm sure there were probably static site generators then that we could have used to make this happen. But ultimately, and this is, I feel like I'm kind of dancing around the controversy because I want to get to that, but ultimately it's not necessarily the perfect use case. But this, being able to change rules documentation this easily, this is easier than going into Drupal.org and clicking edit on whatever documentation page you're on, and depending on your permissions, having it approved by somebody, seeing the revisions. I feel like this is something that I'm more familiar with as a developer, more comfortable with as a user. If I just click edit and I'm immediately presented with an edit screen. And when I click save, it doesn't screw anything up. It's my copy of that documentation. The author can choose to accept or deny that way. So, back to the presentation slides. Okay. Why is this awesome? We've been talking about this a lot. We can do collaboration on a huge scale. You can outsource all of your documentation to users. How does that work in practice? I was just going through, there's another one that I'm relatively familiar with because I helped write a lot of this to begin with. It's docs.platform.sh. This was my first introduction to Gitbook. Didn't know what I was doing at the time, but everything that platform.sh, kind of like what Pantheon's doing, I'm assuming Acquia will follow suit at some point, is a Gitbook file. And you can, you can't really see it very well, but there's a little GitHub link there, and you can edit that as well. So they are outsourcing it. If you click edit, and you go into the issues of platform, and you just kind of look, the first couple issues here, Fuzzbomb, Drew, Public, none of those are platform.sh employees, and they're helping improve in an open way the documentation of a very closed source solution. That can only be good to have documentation this open all the way around. And for open source, that's even better because we're just totally transparent. We're not locking it behind a username password wall of Drupal. That's one of the reasons it's good, or awesome, as I put it. It's clearly presented documentation in multiple formats: PDF, EPUB, HTML. Stop me when you start thinking Drupal can do some of these things. Total revision and blame system, because we have source control management. Not all of the Gitbook type things out there, those lists of things, are using Git. Some of them are using the other source control management systems. Fun new tool that focuses on content, has a great default experience. Drupal doesn't do that well. There's no default experience. We all know that. That's why there's all kinds of flavors of Drupal that try to give you a good default experience. Some of them do it well, some don't. Ultimately, though, documentation is almost always a section of a website, right? So even if you were to try to get Drupal to give you that default experience, it would have to be in it would still have to be a module or something. It would not be a full-on install profile. And the final one, why is this awesome? It doesn't really matter. Why? Because better documentation is always good. It's good for adoption, it's good for testing, it's good for everybody. Why is it controversial? You probably have already been thinking some of these things. We're presenting Drupal content that isn't in Drupal. So basically we're saying, use this content management system that has this awesome tool. We're not going to use it to show you how to use that tool. And it's kind of like, I think it's a symptom of something big. Static content generators are anti-CMS. They really are. The thing that makes static content site generators awesome is that they are not a CMS. So they will probably never tread on lots of the things that Drupal can do. Drupal, on the other hand, will always be treading on their turf. How do you add comments to your Gitbook? Okay, you're immediately thinking discuss, or something that allows me to plop in a JavaScript thing and I've got comments. How do you protect some of those pages? What if you want your diagrams that are in your documentation to expand when you click on them, or have lots of galleries of screenshots that kind of walk you through step by step what you're supposed to be doing? What about a new fave icon? The Gitbook, if you look at most Gitbooks, this is probably the easiest way to figure it out, is the rendered Gitbook fave icon. There's no way to template that out. You have to physically, every time you build a Gitbook, even if it's local, you still have to go into that build and change that fave icon. There's no way to just override it. And there's 100 things like that about Gitbook that are almost impossible to work with, because the templating isn't there, because there's just, it's so new, they haven't come into all these use cases that people want to modify it. The theme, the reason they all look pretty similar is because it's really hard to create a theme. Basically, you have to modify core for Gitbook to create a theme so that when you push your build, it uses your theme, even though it just gets really funky really quick when you start to try to customize Gitbook. And these are the things that Drupal shines on. These are the things that it just does really, really well. And so this is, I prepared for this early on when I submitted the session, and then I kind of took a hiatus and came back. And in that time, Gitbook, the module on Drupal.org, was posted and became a real module. And I contacted Brian online through his blog, and he replied back. He couldn't come, but this guy's really cool, because what he's done, this is crazy to think about. If you get Gitbook working on your site, and I got one locally almost working, what it does is you create a node, you give it a Git URL, and it checks out that whole repo in your private folder, and then it reads the structure of the Gitbook, whether you use the summary.md or the read the docs format, which is what he's talking about there on the module page, and it creates actual nodes based on the pages, the markdown pages. And then you get to set up, this comes by default with a filter that does it, you get to set up your filter to understand the markdown. So Drupal is actually rendering the content. And then this is what just kind of blows my mind about this. Not only is he just pulling in a copy to the site, if you edit a node that this thing generates, it creates a commit and pushes it to your local copy. And he's got a couple of issues out there right now that he's got some patches that you can actually set it up to push to your server as well. So if you can have your cake and you can eat it as well. You can actually bring in a Gitbook into a Drupal site and you still get the repo. You can still set up the edit link for that repo. People can still edit it as a pull request, and you can still bring in those changes into Drupal. You still get the full experience of Drupal. You can use panels to display it. I think that's pretty awesome. The user experience of this module is horrible. I've put a couple of issues in there. I created a README. There's lots of work that could be done here. But Gitbook's just the beginning, because you guys saw all of those static site generators. It's possible we could create a library of these and allow Drupal to tap into these pieces of content, maybe not as a full-on display to keep the circle going, like we're considering doing with Gitbook, but maybe as a migration source, so that you can actually migrate from Jekyll straight into Drupal, that kind of stuff. So I was just blown away when I just Googled it and there it was, because it wasn't on my radar when I first started this. So I don't know if you've seen Zootopia, but the whole idea of predators and prey living together, I kind of see Drupal as the big tiger and Gitbook as the little bunny. There's probably always going to be a little bit of tension there, but I think it's possible that with a little bit more work on the Gitbook module, we can actually bring all the documentation that Drupal is producing back into Drupal and have a both-and situation. If you can log into the site and edit it, great. It'll push it back out to your repo. If you want to be a part of the community, not log into the website and click edit and go to the repo and do a pull request, great. It'll work that way too. And to me, that's kind of like, well, why don't we do that? So I guess I want to start with this question and see where it leads. Should static generators be powering our documentation? Why or why not? Anyone? You are the community, as much as I am. I don't have an answer.
I mean, whatever's easiest to, whatever gets in the way the least, because it's, as a developer, probably the last thing you want to deal with is writing documentation.
Yeah, you don't.
Somebody
You want to
that's
get it
just
out
writing
of your way.
documentation, they might, you know,
Yeah.
may not be as good as the developer writing some of the things. So if it makes it easier, I think it's a good thing. And clearly, a lot of people are platform.
That's where the wave is headed a little bit.
I'm not committed, but just throwing out ideas. I like the idea of documentation and source control. I believe in putting real commit messages on my commits, by the way. When I update this piece of documentation, I say why, and that's in the record. And if it's community driven, if there are lots and lots of contributors, I think source control is a really good thing to have.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second. I think it shows in some small way a crack in the Drupal armor that Drupal can't do everything very, very well. And if we're putting, the people who know Drupal the best are putting the majority of their content into another system, how long until we lose those developers to Gitbook?
Yeah, well, the other thing that concerns me about it, I mean, this seems like a cool tool, and I like the idea of using it just for a general project. But one thing that concerns me is the idea that then somebody has two ways that they have to know how to update documentation, potentially, depending on what they're looking at. And that's probably not good, for somebody who's new to Drupal, for example.
I would like to see, kind of riffing off of what you just said, I would like to see repos in Drupal with this Gitbook module as maybe a starter point. I'd like to see them treated more like images or something like that, where you just give it a repo URL and Drupal knows what to do with that. It knows how to generate the pages and bring it in. And we just treat things like this as a media type more than anything else. And if you can edit it in Drupal, you could. But
I know there was a discussion about a year, 18 months ago, maybe a little longer, within the documentation working group for Drupal.org about trying to improve the whole experience for documentation. I wonder if anyone's bothered mentioning this to them.
That's a good question, and something we could all do. I think I should probably take a lead, and I don't, because it's just, there's only so much time in the day, but I feel like Drupal documentation on Drupal.org is stuck in this paradigm that worked well for us in Drupal 5 and 6 and was ported over to Drupal 7. There's a lot of content in there. It's hierarchically organized, and sometimes that works against us. Sometimes it works really well, but sometimes I'm just trying to figure out something about rules, and I find I'm like half page to 2 pages in, and then I realize I'm reading documentation for the wrong version of rules. It should be more obvious, what version of module of this documentation, and that's something we had to solve for Drupal Commerce. Everything out there right now for Drupal Commerce documentation is 1.x. And almost all of it is not tagged as such. We just say Drupal Commerce does X, Drupal Commerce does Y, and now Drupal 8 is out, and Drupal Commerce 2 is about to be released, and it does a lot of things really differently. And now we're going to have to kind of backtrack, and that's a documentation problem. That's not necessarily a Gitbook's issue or Drupal's issue, but I feel like the tools that the community has could be better.
Try adding a page to the contributed module list.
There you go. And it shouldn't be that long. You click on the contributed modules, and there's like every slightly popular contributed module has a section.
And it's one continuous select list, and you can't navigate it. It's
totally
way to it.
Totally broken. I don't know why we didn't use tags. I do. I remember the discussions ages ago. I think I can't think of her name now. She works at Drupalize Me now, but Addison, Add One Son. She was in charge of a lot of documentation and made a lot of changes early on. But I feel like it's kind of a call to action for those of us in the room, for the whole community to both do better documentation and to seek out new tools that can help us. Like Andy said, I think it's important to just use what you can. Get something out there. It's better than nothing.
The people that are using this, are they writing commit messages that are useful with the documentation typically? I mean, sometimes it seems like it wouldn't be necessary, but...
Let's that's the other thing. It's totally open, right? Probably not. Lots of merge, commit, fix link to new example GitHub repos.
Update architecture.
And now every commit here is from people, okay, that's a community commit 2 days ago.
See, I didn't even know this was Gitbook, but I pretty much submitted that supply working Redis config.
There you go.
Or was a part of that. I didn't realize it was Gitbook, and I think I opened a support ticket for them to update the documentation when I could have just gone in and
You could
put
have.
a pull request.
And that's the other thing, like, I think as the web evolves, we're used to trying to work in the system they want to work in. So do you file an issue in Drupal.org for documentation? Do you file it in the GitHub repo? Should Drupal.org support Gitbooks? Because it supports module repos, why not a Gitbook repo? Those are all questions I think we should at least look at, not be afraid of, not hide from. And all of those various static generators I was talking about, those are all sources of people that are trying to do something with content that they feel like something like Drupal doesn't do well. So there's probably some cross-pollination we can do there. Any other questions, thoughts, controversies?
Speaking of tools, what tools out there are there for like markdown editing? 'Cause I can see editing like an already made page in GitHub, but I'm not going to write all my documentation straight markdown.
I hesitate recommending this because it's kind of a thorn in my side. I really don't like it, but I do. PHP Storm has a plugin for almost anything. And one of the markdown things, first of all, it updates every day, and I want to shoot it. So some of you are shaking your head. And I was just like, why do you update every day? I think it's because they have some sort of, they make money every time they update, so they try to update it all the time.
I think it's just got that many fixes.
Yeah. So GitHub, Commerce Docs. I was just going to show you what it looks like. This is the Markdown thing, and I know I'm right at 2 o'clock, so I'm going to stop here, but this is what Markdown looks like in PHP Storm, and you can look at a preview, and if you pay for it, which I'm not paying for it, it will, yeah, it's awesome, isn't it? It will show you, because it uses the same theme that PHP Storm uses, it will let you do different things with it. I don't pay for it, and it kind of drives me nuts, but there are tools. There are lots of tools. Markdown's kind of exploding right now.
There's also a WYSIWYG editor for the Markdown that I saw.
I'm going to go ahead and end it here since we've got